The rain fell in a soft drizzle upon King's Landing as the bells of the Red Keep told the hour of dusk. The year was late in the reign of King Viserys I Targaryen, that amiable monarch whose love for peace and festivity was as renowned as his famous forebears' taste for conquest. On that evening, in the private chambers of the royal apartments, a small gathering took place that would reverberate throughout the history of the Seven Kingdoms. Viserys sat upon a cushioned chair near the warmth of a crackling hearth, his silver hair grown thin, and the lines of age and worry etched across his once handsome face. Alicent Hightower, the king's second wife, stood behind him, poised and graceful in her green gown, her eyes quietly reflecting the dancing flames. Princess Rhaenyra, the king's heir by royal decree, observed them both from across the chamber with a mixture of pride and wariness. Between them, the subject of this meeting paced in ever more agitated circles. Daemon Targaryen, the prince of the city, the rogue prince as some had named him in hushed whispers and bawdy tavern songs. He cut a striking figure even in that hushed setting. His silver-gold hair, cropped shorter than fashion might favor, gave him a fierce air. An embroidered black tunic offset the legendary features of House Targaryen. Yet, as he faced Viserys and Alicent, the usual haughtiness was tempered by a paternal protectiveness. The matter was simple in concept, though hardly so in its ramifications. The betrothal of Aegon Targaryen, Alicent's eldest son, to Baela Targaryen, Daemon's own daughter by his late wife Lena Velaryon. Normally, alliances of House Targaryen remained within the family to preserve the blood of the dragon, but in recent years the lines had begun to fray. The realm whispered of a deepening divide between the Greens, who favored Alicent's children, and the Blacks, who championed Princess Rhaenyra's claim. No official banners had been raised, no swords drawn in earnest, but each feast day, each tournament, and each passing rumor deepened the invisible fissure. It had been Princess Rhaenyra herself, her heart heavy with knowledge of the tensions that swirled, who quietly suggested the match. Baela was spirited, Daemon's favorite, the older of his two twin daughters. Aegon was soon to be of an age, though he was known to be headstrong, fond of wine, and prone to a certain indolence. Could such a union not patch the rift between the children of Alicent and those of Viserys' first marriage, while also bringing Daemon into a closer alliance with those who sat the Iron Throne? That was the theory, at least. Viserys, desperate for harmony, seized upon the suggestion. In his eyes, nothing mattered more than the Targaryen legacy continuing unbroken and unchallenged. And so a secret discussion was arranged, small yet momentous, to settle the terms before any official announcement. Daemon had arrived that evening, reluctant but resigned, for he knew the times. The realm was all too eager to find any reason to suspect the Targaryens of discord. If this betrothal could heal the realm's doubts or prevent some future conflict, it was worth consideration. The king coughed softly into a silken handkerchief, earning a glance of worry from Alicent. Then he began to speak in measured tones, explaining how a betrothal now, solemnized at court, might unify the different branches of the family. Alicent watched Daemon's face carefully, for he was not a man known to bow easily to the desires of others. When Viserys finished, Daemon's eyes flicked toward the mantle, where a dragon-shaped candelabra held 3 flickering flames. He lingered in silence so long that Alicent felt compelled to speak. She told him she believed in the future of House Targaryen, that they must stand as one. She even offered a rare, if reserved, smile. Rhaenyra also lent her voice, reminding her uncle that the girls, Baela and Rhaena, were well regarded in the court, and it would benefit them greatly to have the goodwill of the queen's faction. Each word was carefully chosen, each caution gently stated. The tension in the room was thick enough to be carved by a blade. At last, Daemon inclined his head. He did not bend his knee. Daemon bent to no one but the king, and even then grudgingly, but he acknowledged that should Baela find the arrangement agreeable, he would not stand in her way. And so it was that, with a curt nod, the bargain was struck. Letters would be drawn, the official notices prepared, and within the fortnight, the betrothal would be announced before the lords of the realm. In the following days, a dozen courtiers, maesters, and highborn knights fussed over the details. Baela, a child of the sea and the sky, grew restless under their attentions. She was barely of an age to be considered for marriage in the eyes of some, but Targaryens married young. She chafed at the notion that her fate lay bound to a young prince she scarcely knew, Aegon, who was known for his bright hair and his lazy smirk, who rode the young Drake Stormcloud and spent his nights in the company of cups and flatterers. When Baela first confronted her father, Daemon cast his gaze aside as though searching for the right words. He was no gentle father. He had been affectionate but distant, allowing Baela her freedom upon the deck of ships and within the mews of dragons. He told her quietly that she was free to refuse, but the look in his eyes said it would do no good for the realm. Baela felt her indignation soften when she saw that flicker of weariness in his gaze. She did not love Aegon, how could she? But she loved her father, the memory of her mother, and she held a fierce loyalty to her blood. She shrugged off her misgivings with the impetuousness of youth. "I will not be a broodmare," she said, chin held high, voice tight. "If I must marry him, let me remain a dragon rider." Daemon laughed at that, a soft, rare sound from the rogue prince. He promised her that no one would ever take her dragon away, nor keep her from the skies. For his part, Aegon II Targaryen met the prospect of betrothal with a mix of annoyance and careless acceptance. He was older than Baela by a few years, but not by many. The queen spoke gently to him, explaining that a match with Daemon's daughter would bring the family together. Aegon shrugged, half bored. He had never thought much of the princesses who dotted the court. His interests lay in carousing, hawking, and an occasional flirtation. He offered no open hostility to the arrangement. Instead, he viewed it as a duty, an inevitability that would plant him more firmly in the line of Targaryen succession, should the need arise. If anything, the challenge spurred his pride. He told his friends that he would wed the brazen girl, bed her, and in time, prove himself a better heir than his half-sister Rhaenyra. The official announcement was made in the throne room, in front of courtiers and assembled lords who had arrived unexpectedly from many corners of the realm. A small wave of rumor had preceded them. The Red Keep was abuzz that some momentous event was soon to be declared. Yet few suspected precisely what was to be said. Lords from houses strong and proud, Baratheon, Tyrell, Lannister, Valerion, stood in silent curiosity as King Viserys, robed in Targaryen red, took a seat upon the Iron Throne. Alicent and Rhaenyra stood on either side, that symbolic positioning drawing murmurs. Aegon, wearing a doublet of black and gold, stood near the foot of the throne. Baela, wearing a gown of Valyrian steel gray, embroidered with small silver dragons, held her head high beside her father. The king's voice rang out over the hall, announcing the betrothal of his dear son Aegon to the bright and beloved granddaughter of the crown, Baela Targaryen, daughter of Daemon Targaryen and the late Lady Lena Valerion. Viserys spoke of unity, of healing old wounds, and of forging a bond that would honor the memory of House Targaryen's storied past. Polite applause greeted the words, but beneath the measured clapping lurked a swirl of confusion, suspicion, and speculation. At once, the subtle lines between green and black seemed to blur. Here was the mother of Aegon, Alicent Hightower, forging an alliance with Daemon, who had been fiercely protective of Rhaenyra. And though Rhaenyra's own children were not directly involved in this match, she seemed to support the union, standing silently behind her father's throne, her eyes fixed on Aegon and Baela as if calculating the future. Many watchers in the hall noted that Princess Helaena Targaryen, Aegon's younger sister, wore an expression of distant dreaminess and never once looked at the betrothed couple. Meanwhile, Aemon Targaryen, the second son of Alicent, observed with a measured coolness, as though appraising the worth of the arrangement like a swordsman measures an opponent. In the wake of the announcement, a great feast was planned. The kitchens of the Red Keep bustled with activity as they prepared for a night of celebration. Musicians were summoned from the city, and the great hall was adorned with the banners of House Targaryen, flanked by those of House Valerion in a sign of respect for Baela's mother's lineage. Wines from the arbor were rolled in by the barrel, and the grandness of the feast promised to rival the wedding festivities of years past. When the feast came, it began with all the glittering pomp and ceremony of a royal gathering. Tapestries told of Aegon the Conqueror's triumphs. Great candelabras lent the chamber a warm glow. At the high table, Baela sat by Aegon's side, a ring of betrothal on her finger set with a rare pinkish gemstone rumored to have come from Sithorios. She eyed it with a mixture of fascination and discomfort, for it felt heavy upon her hand. Aegon, for his part, tried to lighten the mood by leaning in close and murmuring wry observations about the lords and ladies dancing below. Baela, initially determined to remain aloof, found that the prince's jesting could be amusing, if a bit coarse. He pointed out Lord Jasper Wilde's booming laugh, Sir Criston Cole's stern gaze whenever Daemon passed, and the almost comical sight of Lord Beesbury losing his place in conversation. Gradually, in the flickering light of the feast, Baela relaxed. She remembered Aegon's reputation and tried to see him not as the reprobate rumored among the court, but as a boy ill-prepared for the burdens of royalty. Yet the undercurrent of tension did not dissipate so easily. Alicent, sitting beside King Viserys, kept a watchful eye on her son, wary of any impropriety. Daemon observed from the other side of the table, silently taking note of Aegon's mannerisms, as if measuring each gesture to judge his worthiness for Baela's hand. Rhaenyra, Luke and Jace at her side, raised her goblet in a show of support, but it did not escape anyone's notice that neither she nor Alicent made more than polite conversation throughout the evening. An uneasy truce hung in the air, sealed by toasts and forced smiles. Over the following weeks, the betrothal set a new tone within the Red Keep. Those who had sworn silent allegiance to the Greens found themselves reconsidering old animosities. Could they still distrust Daemon and Rhaenyra when their own champion's heir would marry Daemon's daughter? Meanwhile, those who had rallied to the Blacks questioned whether Rhaenyra was giving away too much. Her father was still set on her as heir, but if Aegon was to be so closely allied, might that threaten Rhaenyra's future hold on the throne? The entire court was abuzz with quiet speculation. In an effort to show good faith, Alicent invited Baela to take daily meals with her, to learn the gentler arts of court. Needlework, the discreet sharing of knowledge, the network of alliances that a good queen or queen consort must cultivate. Baela bristled at first, but soon discovered that Alicent's lessons were not simply about sewing and gossip. She taught how to read the subtle cues of the court, to parse the words left unsaid. Baela found it intriguing, if occasionally dull. She would have preferred to be out in the yard practicing her sword work with Rhaenyra's sons, or better still, flying upon her dragon, Moondancer. Yet she endured. When Alicent saw Baela's eyes glaze over, she would adopt a softer approach. She realized that Baela was not a typical princess to be molded. Alicent took care not to smother her. Aegon, too, was made to go through new routines. The queen insisted that he appear more frequently in the training yard, or attend sessions with the maesters on matters of statecraft. She declared, gently but firmly, that a future consort to a strong Targaryen princess must be seen as an equal in both courtesy and competence. At first, Aegon grumbled and tried to shirk those responsibilities. But to his surprise, when he ventured to the training yard, he found Daemon there one afternoon, instructing Jacaerys and Lucerys in the finer points of swordsmanship. Daemon offered Aegon a chance to spar, a small but significant invitation. The onlookers fell silent as the two Targaryen princes faced each other under the sun. The clang of steel rang out in the courtyard. Aegon was outmatched by Daemon's skill. Few men in the realm could best the rogue prince, but he held his own for longer than some expected. Daemon ended the bout with a swift disarm, though he turned it into a lesson rather than a humiliation. "Your stance is too narrow," he said, sliding Dark Sister back into its scabbard. "You're quick, but you waste too much energy in wasted movement. Practice, and you may grow into a decent swordsman." It was not high praise, but it was more than Aegon had expected. A spark of pride flickered in him, and he found himself returning to the yard in subsequent days, determined to improve. In turn, he found a grudging respect from Daemon, and even from Jacaerys, who offered to train with him so they might both hone their skills. Aemond watched these developments from the sidelines, occasionally joining in, but more often stepping away to train alone. Some whispered that Aemond felt overshadowed by Aegon's sudden alliance with Daemon. Others suggested he was simply more comfortable on the back of Vhagar than in the presence of courtiers. As the weeks turned to months, Baela and Aegon were often seen together around the Red Keep and its grounds, always flanked by watchful eyes but beginning to develop a tentative camaraderie. They still clashed. Baela had a hot temper inherited from her father, and Aegon's occasionally uncaring remarks could set her off. But there were softer moments. Once, she found him in the library, where he had been compelled by Alicent to study the history of Targaryen conquests. He had fallen asleep with his head propped on a heavy tome. Baela poked him awake, teased him for his laziness, then sat beside him and actually explained some of the passages that related to their Valyrian ancestry through her mother's side. In that moment, the vast tapestry of their shared heritage took on a living energy, uniting them in the pages of old histories and the memory of dragons long dead. When word of the betrothal reached the far corners of the realm, lords responded with letters of congratulation or caution. Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, grandfather to Baela, had mixed feelings. As the Lord of the Tides, he valued strong ties to the crown. Yet he had always championed Rhaenyra and her lineage, believing his blood ran strong in her children. This new arrangement threatened to blur those lines. Nonetheless, Corlys sent a letter of acceptance and carefully chosen words of support. In the Vale, Lady Jane Arryn nodded thoughtfully when the Raven arrived. The Vale had always been close to Rhaenyra, who had spent part of her youth there, and Daemon himself had been named the Defender of the Vale in the earlier part of his life, though that did not end well with his first wife. Still, if this betrothal brought peace, Lady Jane saw no reason to protest. The same pragmatism echoed from the north, where Lord Cregan Stark sent well wishes, though no effusive praise. For now, the realm accepted this new path. Yet old resentments do not die easily. Ser Criston Cole, who had become the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, watched with an inscrutable face. He had once been close to Princess Rhaenyra, or so rumors said, before their falling out. Now, seeing Rhaenyra and Alicent forced into an uneasy alliance, he could not help but suspect hidden motives. In the shadows of the Red Keep, lesser knights and ladies whispered that King Viserys' health was failing by the day. What would happen when he was gone? Would the realm truly accept Rhaenyra if Aegon, now so closely bonded to a daughter of Daemon Targaryen, stood ready to press a claim? No open hostility flared, but distrust lingered like a sword at the side. Nevertheless, the year passed quietly. To the relief of many, no open feuds broke out. There were spats and whispered rumors, but on the surface, King's Landing existed in relative harmony. Aegon soared occasionally on Stormcloud, though that young dragon was not as mighty as Sunfire, the beast that might have been his in other timelines, nor as fearsome as Vhagar or Caraxes. On a crisp autumn morning, the two betrothed took to the skies together for the first time. It was a sight that captured the attention of the entire court. Two Targaryens, albeit young and untested, flying side by side above the Blackwater. The sea breeze carried away their laughter, a rare moment of unburdened joy. Even Daemon, who viewed the world through wary eyes, found a measure of relief in the spectacle. He had not lost his hunger for adventure, but age and experience had tempered his impulsiveness. For Baela to be seen as a rightful princess, bound to the prince who carried at least one branch of the Targaryen future, might shield her from the viciousness of court. For Aegon, the betrothal forced him to engage in the responsibilities he would otherwise have shirked. One evening, Daemon approached his daughter after a feast, placing a hand gently on her shoulder and observing that she seemed happier than when the arrangement was first announced. Baela did not answer at once, but her cheeks flushed slightly. She admitted that Aegon could be kind when he chose to be, though he still had his moods. Daemon only nodded, as if to say that was the Targaryen way. Fire and blood to varying degrees. It was not long before talk of a wedding surfaced, though King Viserys wished to see more time pass to ensure the realm had fully accepted the betrothal. The king's own health wavered, and Alicent pressed him to keep a steady eye on the future. The days of feast and forced merriment wore upon him, and yet he still longed for a final grand celebration in his lifetime, the wedding of his beloved son to his beloved granddaughter. When the day was set, the Red Keep buzzed anew with preparations. The date chosen was in the spring, an auspicious season of renewal. Ravens flew to every corner of Westeros, carrying invitations stamped with the three-headed dragon seal. The highborn lords and ladies of the Seven Kingdoms, as well as emissaries from the free cities, all prepared to converge on King's Landing for the grand event. The planning became an elaborate tapestry of decisions: what colors would dominate the ceremonies, how the wedding feast would proceed, which tournaments would be held in honor of the union. Alicent and Rhaenyra worked in cautious cooperation, each selecting certain details of the festivities, while the Master of Revels scurried to accommodate the competing visions. Amid this whirlwind, Baela and Aegon found themselves at the center. The air days were filled with ceremonial obligations, greeting lordly guests who arrived early, listening to the maesters drone about the genealogies that would be reaffirmed by their match, and fitting for the wedding garments that tailors and seamstresses labored over day and night. Baela felt suffocated by the endless chatter of ladies fussing over fabrics, but she endured it for the sake of duty. Aegon, too, seemed to relent somewhat, having matured over the past year in small but noticeable ways. He still drank perhaps more than he should, but he no longer staggered into the castle at dawn, nor fell asleep in small council sessions if forced to attend. There was a new sense of focus in him, born of the knowledge that soon he would stand before half the realm as a husband, a man who might one day guide the future of House Targaryen. In the midst of these preparations, the king's failing health cast a long shadow. Some days Viserys seemed almost vigorous, holding court with a polite smile, receiving envoys, listening to petitions with a fair-minded ear. Then, in the very next dawn, he might be confined to his bed, shaking with fever. Alicent grew tense, and Rhaenyra's worry sharpened. Neither wanted to see him taken by the stranger. Daemon, though often absent, made an effort to stand in the king's presence, especially during the crucial moments of planning. He no longer openly defied the Hightowers, though the old resentment had not vanished. If anything, it was bridged by the one thing they had in common: a concern for the king's health and a desire to see the realm stable. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. Vendors crowded the streets of King's Landing, hawking ribbons and small trinkets shaped like dragons. Innkeepers filled their rooms with highborn visitors and commoners alike, all drawn by the prospect of a grand spectacle. Gold cloaks patrolled to keep the peace. Within the Red Keep, the final touches were applied to the wedding garments. Baela wore a gown of Targaryen black with red accents, and a sash of sea green to honor her Valyrian blood and the unity of the day. Aegon wore a matching doublet, black threaded with gold, his silver gold hair shining beneath the crown-like ornament crafted for him by the royal jeweler. The ceremony itself was held in the throne room, a departure from the more common choice of the royal September. But Viserys had insisted. House Targaryen followed many of the old Valyrian ways, and he desired that his son and granddaughter be wed in the sight of the Iron Throne, symbolizing the monarchy's unity with their union. Red carpets were laid out before the dais, and the hall was filled to capacity with lords, ladies, knights, and commoners who peered in from the gallery above. The king managed to walk that day, though he leaned heavily on a cane. Alicent remained by his side, her expression both hopeful and anxious. Rhaenyra stood on the opposite side of the dais, looking resplendent in her own gown. Daemon, in a fine black coat with the silver dragon brooch pinned at his chest, stood near Baela, gently touching her shoulder as the ceremony began. The Septon spoke the words, but the Targaryens also invoked the old Valyrian traditions, repeating ancient vows in a tongue few in Westeros understood. A small bowl of dragonfire was placed between them, and both Aegon and Baela symbolically touched a blade to the flame before clasping hands, a practice meant to represent the forging of a bond as strong as Valyrian steel. When they turned to face the assembled crowd, the hall erupted in applause. Across King's Landing, from Flea Bottom to the Street of Silk, the people cheered, if only for the promise of free food and drink that often accompanied such royal celebrations. A grand feast followed in the Great Hall with an endless procession of courses: roast swan stuffed with mushrooms, honey cakes shaped like dragons, spiced wine from Dorne, and sweet water from the Vale. Musicians from across the realm took turns entertaining. Jongleur performed feats of acrobatics, while jesters in half-dragon masks danced among the tables. Aegon and Baela presided at the high table, flanked by Viserys, Alicent, Rhaenyra, and Daemon. At intervals, various lords and knights stepped forward to present gifts. Lord Boros Baratheon, broad-shouldered and boisterous, offered a magnificent black stallion. Lord Jason Lannister bestowed a pair of golden chalices encrusted with rubies, shaped in the form of dragons. House Velaryon gifted a splendidly carved ship's figurehead depicting a snarling sea serpent, meant as a tribute to the union of the seas, Velaryon, and the skies, Targaryen. The greatest gift of all came from the king himself. He presented Aegon with a Valyrian steel dagger, slender and deadly, its hilt bound in dragonbone. To Baela, he gave a necklace of pale pearls said to have been harvested by Merling priests in the Far East. The crowd gasped at the sight, enthralled by the lavishness. Dancing followed, and the lords and ladies tried to outdo one another in splendor. Baela found herself whirled around the dance floor by a cavalcade of suitors who wanted to pay their respects. She danced with Jacaerys, who teased her about her new husband. She danced with Lucerys, who almost tripped over his own feet, still not fully grown into them. She even allowed Lord Cregan Stark, a tall and somber man, to guide her through a slow reel. Then came Aegon's turn. The music was light, the steps quick. At first, they moved stiffly, each uncertain of the other, but as the song continued, they found a rhythm. Smiles overcame their earlier awkwardness. The watchers cheered as the prince and princess spun in the torchlight, the reflections of the flames glinting off their dragon sigils. Yet even in that moment of joy, old suspicions lingered around the hall. Aemon Targaryen, tall and lean, watched with an unfathomable expression. Helaena Targaryen sat quietly, occasionally murmuring odd phrases to herself about webs and wings. Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, observed all from a place of dignity beside her husband, Corlys. She was gracious in her manner, but her eyes seemed to hold a glimmer of concern. At length, the night wound down. The bride and groom were escorted amid laughter and the bawdy comments of drunken lords to their marriage chambers. Targaryen weddings traditionally included certain rites, sometimes more savage in the old days, but in recent generations, those rites had softened to a gentle bedding ceremony, with the ladies removing the groom's garments and the men escorting the bride away. Baela glared daggers at those who tried to paw at her, but she held her tongue. Aegon, half-dazed by wine, still managed to remain chivalrous enough not to let the crowd jostle her too much. Eventually, the doors closed upon the newlyweds, leaving the lingering guests to amuse themselves until the small hours of the morning. Come dawn, the realm awoke to a newly married pair who held a delicate balance of power in their hands. Rhaenyra and Alicent, for all their mutual distrust, could not ignore that their children's union tied them together in ways that could not easily be severed. Some believed that this marriage would permanently end any question of succession disputes, for if Aegon stood with Baela, then Daemon stood with Rhaenyra, and all were as one. Others, more cynical, thought it merely postponed a reckoning. Nonetheless, for a time, King's Landing found a sort of uneasy peace. Viserys, heartened by the success of the wedding, seemed almost rejuvenated. The autumn harvest proved bountiful, and trade along the Blackwater boomed. Tournaments were held to celebrate the new princess and prince. In one such tourney, Aegon himself tilted against Ser Criston Cole. Though Aegon was unhorsed in the third pass, he earned some acclaim for breaking 2 of Cole's lances, proving he was no mere princeling in the saddle. Baela looked on from the stands, proud but still teasing when they met afterward, telling him he should grip the lance less tightly so his arm wouldn't grow numb. In the evening after that tourney, they walked together in the castle gardens, escorted at a discreet distance by a pair of Kingsguard. The day's excitement had left Aegon with a bruise on his shoulder, and Baela teased him lightly about it, but she also dabbed a cloth soaked in cool water against the skin. The gentleness of her touch made Aegon reflect that this was not the future he had expected for himself. He still carried a sense of entitlement. He was, after all, a Targaryen prince, but he had found in Baela a partner who refused to cower before him. Instead, she challenged him. She demanded he be better. If she did not see him practicing, she scolded him. If she caught him drunk, she harangued him until he poured out the wine. And yet, beneath that fire, There was a warmth that belied her fierce exterior. In turn, Baela discovered sides of Aegon she never would have suspected. He was capable of surprising sincerity, of a loyalty that manifested in small but meaningful gestures. Presenting her with a new bridle for Moondancer, woven with silver thread, or quietly arranging for her father's old armorers to refit a cuirass so it would protect her without hindering her sword arm. They were not love-struck, as in the tales of wandering minstrels, but something genuine grew between them, fueled by mutual respect and a fascination with the possibilities of their future. That future weighed upon them more than once. Rumors abounded of a certain lord who whispered that, with Baela at Aegon's side, perhaps Rhaenyra's claim should be set aside entirely. In a private conversation, Baela confronted Aegon about such talk. He scowled, disclaiming any involvement, and insisted he would not dishonor her or her father by fueling succession plots. He told her that the Iron Throne was not the seat of his ambitions. He preferred the freedom of the sky and the comfort of indulgences. However, Baela reminded him that sometimes men are made kings not by their own desire, but by the will of others. She made him swear, if he ever did find the crown thrust upon him, that he would protect her family, not cast them aside. He laughed at the notion but gave his word. The years that followed continued in relative peace. King Viserys' health waxed and waned, but each time he slipped toward death's door, he rallied in improbable fashion. Aemond grew into a fearsome warrior, forging a reputation all his own, especially after claiming Vhagar years earlier. Helaena remained in her dreamlike world, her prophecies and riddles occasionally unnerving the court. Rhaenyra's sons grew to fine young men, each taking to their duties and forming alliances. The overshadowing gloom of a potential succession crisis receded, replaced by the day-to-day tasks of governance and the negotiations of trade and marriage that fill any stable royal court. Meanwhile, Baela and Aegon themselves moved forward, forging a domestic life that was as balanced as any Targaryen match could be. They bickered, certainly. She scolded him for his frequent cups, and he complained about her relentless training and independent streak. But these quarrels never burned into hatred. Often, Daemon or Rhaenyra observed them from a distance, as if surprised that such a match could hold. Still, hold it did, strengthened by the presence of dragons, the demands of royal life, and the curious happiness they discovered in each other's flaws. The first real test of their union came when a swarm of Triarchic pirates harried the coast near Blackwater Bay, threatening to disrupt shipping lines. Lord Corlys Velaryon called for assistance, and the king, too frail to mount a campaign, summoned the royal family to address the threat. Daemon volunteered to lead the crown's forces by sea, while Aemond flew on Vhagar to scout the pirates' positions. Aegon and Baela were granted permission to take their dragons as well, though the actual fighting was expected to be minimal. The pirates were far outmatched. When the fleet set sail from Driftmark, Aegon and Baela soared overhead on Stormcloud and Moondancer. It was the first time the two flew into a potential battle together, each bearing Targaryen armor that matched their mounts' scaled coloration. Baela's heart pounded with excitement. She had always been fearless, and Aegon, for all his earlier dalliances, felt a stirring of pride. The wind rushed past them, the sea sparkled below, and in that moment, they felt truly alive. The confrontation with the pirates proved swift. Daemon's leadership at sea, combined with the might of Vhagar overhead, quickly scattered the raiders. Aegon and Baela circled, breathing small gouts of flame to frighten the enemy into surrender. Within hours, the threat was ended. That night, around a fire on the deck of the Velaryon flagship, they celebrated their minor victory. Aemond, rarely one for mirth, even smiled faintly and toasted Aegon's skill in the sky. Daemon clapped his daughter on the shoulder, though he warned her not to let success breed complacency. The starlight shimmered on the waves, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed all the Targaryens breathed as one. In King's Landing, when word reached the court of the victory, the people cheered. It was a rare moment of cooperation among the Targaryen branches, a glimmer of the old unity that had forged the realm centuries ago. For a while, it felt as though the seeds of civil strife might never sprout. As the seasons turned, Baela found herself with child. The announcement spread joy through the Red Keep, prompting a renewed wave of hope that the new generation might be a symbol of lasting unity. Viserys, overjoyed, ordered 100 doves released in celebration. He prayed to the Seven and thanked the old gods of Valyria in his private way, that he might live to see this grandchild. Alicent fussed over Baela like a mother hen, ensuring she had the best care from maesters and midwives. Rhaenyra too expressed genuine happiness, though she was mindful of the implications for the line of succession. Another Targaryen child, with blood from both the Blacks and the Greens, would further entwine their branches, for better or worse. When Baela gave birth, it was a difficult labor that lasted through a stormy night, thunder rumbling in the sky, as if echoing the princess's cries. Aegon paced outside her chambers, panic creeping into his eyes with each passing hour. Daemon, too, was grim and silent, haunted by memories of how Baela's mother had died in childbirth. At last, as the dawn broke, the midwives emerged to announce the child's arrival. A girl, healthy and strong, with a soft wail that carried through the corridors like a call to adventure. Baela survived, though she was pale and exhausted. When Aegon was finally permitted to enter, he found his wife clutching the infant, her hair damp with sweat, but her eyes shining with relief and triumph. They named the child Visenya, after the sister and wife of Aegon the Conqueror, that formidable Targaryen queen of old. Viserys, upon hearing the news, wept openly, proclaiming that the name was both a blessing and an echo of Targaryen might. Daemon held the baby in his arms, awkwardly at first, but she reached out tiny fingers and grasped at one of his silver locks, prompting the barest hint of a smile from the rogue prince. Alicent insisted on organizing a grand christening feast. Rhaenyra contributed lavishly as well, offering the child a small golden dragon egg from the hatcheries on Dragonstone as a symbol of her lineage. The court exclaimed at the wonder of a new Targaryen heir, not in line for the throne necessarily, but in line for the blood of dragons. Whispers circulated that this child, being half green and half black, embodied the bridging of the family's rift. Surely now, some murmured, they shall never make war upon themselves. Others scoffed, claiming Targaryen history was riddled with kinslaying and betrayal, and no babe in swaddling cloth could guarantee peace. But for the moment, optimism prevailed. That optimism guided the next year of Baela's life as she recovered from the rigors of childbirth, tended to Visenya, and continued to appear at court alongside Aegon. They presented a united front, greeting emissaries from Pentos and Bravos, attending the king's decrees, even traveling briefly to Highgarden for a tour that sought to shore up alliances among the Tyrells and their bannermen. At Highgarden, they strolled through the famed gardens, pausing to admire sculptures and water features. The ladies of the Reach welcomed Baela enthusiastically, impressed by her stories of riding Moondancer. Aegon drank in the lavish feasts, but was careful to maintain a measure of decorum, mindful of Baela's watchful gaze. Back in the capital, King Viserys' health took another turn for the worse. The maesters struggled to keep him comfortable, employing leeches and potions, but he grew gaunt and pale. Rhaenyra spent hours at his bedside, as did Alicent. If only that fatherly love could have soothed the old wounds that lingered below the surface. Daemon came and went, restless, sometimes speaking harshly to the maesters as if blaming them for Viserys' decline. Aegon and Baela also kept vigil, bringing baby Visenya in from time to time, hoping the sight of his granddaughter might lift the king's spirits. Viserys would smile, reaching a trembling hand to stroke the babe's cheek, whispering that the realm had nothing to fear as long as Targaryens stood united. When the king finally passed, it was in the quiet hours of the night. Alicent and Rhaenyra were both present, each holding one of his hands. He went gently, breathing his last with a soft, rattling sigh. News spread through King's Landing by dawn. Many wept in genuine grief. Others felt only a cold fear that the old man's passing would stir the pot of ambition. But the existence of Aegon and Baela's union seemed to calm the immediate shock. The lords looked to Rhaenyra, the named heir, and also to Aegon, now wed to a princess from the other side of the family. The hope that no open conflict would erupt rippled through every level of society. The funeral for King Viserys was a somber affair. His body was laid out in the Great September, then cremated in the Targaryen tradition, with dragons roaring overhead. At the funeral pyre, Rhaenyra stood as his heir, draped in black. Alicent, red-eyed from weeping, joined her. Baela and Aegon stood close by, each supporting the other. Daemon, silent, stared into the flames with a face carved from stone, a swirl of emotions hidden behind his eyes. A swirl of black and green clothing merged in the courtyard, with no open hostility. According to Viserys' decree, the succession was clear. Rhaenyra Targaryen was to be crowned queen. In another world, perhaps, the moment of crowning would have unleashed chaos, with half the realm following Alicent's children. But here, after years of betrothal, marriage, and the birth of a child that connected both sides, the impetus for a civil war was diffused. Aegon himself bent the knee before Rhaenyra, swearing fealty in front of the assembled lords and ladies in the dragon pit. He did so without hesitation, his eyes briefly meeting Baela's. With that kneel, the rest of House Hightower's loyalists followed suit, especially after Alicent's quiet nod of acceptance. The cheers that greeted Rhaenyra's coronation were genuine, if not unanimous. Some still harbored private doubts. Yet the presence of Aegon at her side, his hand entwined with Baela's, quelled the tongues of more vocal dissenters. Even Otto Hightower, having been recalled as Hand during the final years of Viserys' reign, found himself standing beside Daemon at the coronation. Forced into an uneasy handshake that sealed at least a surface-level cooperation for the new queen's realm. Queen Rhaenyra's reign thus began under the omen of unity rather than immediate war. She proclaimed that her half-brother Aegon and his wife Baela would serve as Prince and Princess of Dragonstone, a position that symbolized their importance as the next generation of Targaryen leadership. This decision conferred upon them the seat that had once been held by Rhaenyra herself when she was Princess of Dragonstone. Some courtiers frowned, recalling that Jacaerys was Rhaenyra's eldest son, but Rhaenyra balanced the titles among her children and stepchildren with calculated wisdom. Jacaerys, whom many believed would inherit the throne after Rhaenyra, was given new honors and responsibilities in the small council. Lucerys remained the heir to Driftmark, pleasing the Velaryon faction. The lines of inheritance wove a complicated tapestry, but none could deny that a sense of cooperation was maintained. For her part, Baela embraced her new title. Dragonstone had always held a special allure for her. Its volcanic mountains, the ancient citadel carved in the shape of dragons, the roar of the sea below the cliffs. Aegon was less enamored of the island's dark grandeur, but he appreciated the autonomy it gave him away from the pressures of King's Landing. They made the move with their infant daughter Visenya, accompanied by a modest retinue of knights, maesters, and servants. Daemon sailed with them for a time, showing Baela the old fortress's hidden corners, the places he and Rhaenyra had once haunted in their youth. He stayed only briefly, then departed, leaving them to forge their own rule as Prince and Princess of Dragonstone. Settled in Dragonstone, Aegon and Baela discovered a life of partial seclusion punctuated by royal responsibilities. They oversaw the garrison that protected the fortress, organized the port's defenses, and entertained visiting lords from across the narrow sea. Baela took Moondancer on frequent flights around the island, scouring the rocky crags for signs of other, younger dragons rumored to roam free. Aegon gradually adjusted to the quiet, learning to appreciate the wind off the sea at dawn, though he still indulged in merriment whenever they ventured back to King's Landing. All the while, Queen Rhaenyra sat the Iron Throne. She faced the usual challenges of a monarch: uprisings in the distant corners of the realm, disputes over trade tariffs, disagreements among powerful lords. Yet she was spared the worst specter of civil war, for the houses that might have risen for Aegon remained, at least for the time being, in acceptance of Rhaenyra's rule. Each passing year deepened the sense that perhaps the Targaryens had finally learned the value of keeping their house united. There were, of course, moments that tested that unity. When a plague struck the Westerlands, devastating the fields near Lannisport, some blamed Rhaenyra's government for not responding swiftly enough, questioning whether Aegon should intervene. Alicent, still in King's Landing, occasionally bristled at the new queen's decisions. Aemond, too, grew restless, seeking glory and forging alliances of his own in the Reach and the Stormlands. Yet so long as Aegon stood with his sister the Queen, giving no credence to challengers, no banner was raised against her. In time, Baela bore another child, this time a son named Magon, a name chosen to honor past Targaryen kings while hopefully avoiding the darker legacies of old. Aegon embraced fatherhood with a surprising fervor, delighting in playing with his young children among the courtyard dragons of Dragonstone. Letters traveled frequently between King's Landing and Dragonstone, as the royal family stayed in close counsel, a far cry from the secret resentments that once festered. When Rhaenyra gave birth to a daughter of her own, another princess named Aelora, Baela and Aegon traveled back to King's Landing to meet their new sibling niece. Once again, the halls of the Red Keep rang with the laughter of children, and if some cynics found the arrangement perplexing, the Targaryens themselves seemed to accept it with a shrug. Blood of the dragon made for complicated family trees, but so long as they remained loyal to each other, it served the realm in ways it rarely had before. That year, after the harvest feasts, the Queen announced a grand council to reaffirm the line of succession, ensuring no doubt lingered after the swirl of births and titles. The High Lords gathered, from Dorne to the north, from the Riverlands to the Vale. In a solemn ceremony, Rhaenyra had each lord confirm that she remained their rightful queen. She named her eldest son, Jacaerys, as Prince of the Realm and next in line for the Iron Throne. She further proclaimed that, should Jacaerys die without issue, the throne would pass to Lucerys, and failing him, to Aegon and Baela's children. The ordering placed Rhaenyra's sons firmly ahead, but recognized the importance of Aegon's line, giving them a place that was undisputed. A few grumbles arose, especially from those who had once whispered about the parentage of Rhaenyra's children by Laenor Velaryon. But the union of Baela and Aegon had weakened those naysayers. Corlys Velaryon gave his blessing, standing beside Rhaenys. The Hightowers, while perhaps not jubilant, raised no protest. Daemon stood behind the throne, arms crossed, but silent in his approval. With the realm's lords witnessing, the council sealed the arrangement with their signatures and seals. The tension that might have erupted in another life diffused, replaced by a guarded contentment. From that day onward, the Targaryens worked to maintain what they had built. They never quite shook off the inherent volatility of their lineage. Dragons, ambition, and pride still ran hot in their veins. Aemond, continuing to roam the skies on Vhagar, carried himself with a haughty edge, but he refrained from open defiance. Helaena pursued her quiet interests, collecting insects and weaving cryptic prophecies, occasionally startling the court with eerie predictions. Alicent grew older, focusing her energies on her grandchildren, forging new alliances to benefit them. Rhaenyra ruled from King's Landing, striving to be as just and wise a monarch as her father had hoped. And so it was that the long-feared dance of the dragons never came to pass in its bloodiest form. Instead, it transformed into a slow dance of politics and compromise, of intertwined kinship that, though sometimes fractious, ultimately held the realm together. Some battles still erupted, external threats, minor rebellions, the machinations of the free cities, but the Targaryens did not turn their swords upon each other as they might have in a different turning of fate. The memories of old grudges lingered but were softened by the recognition that nothing was more destructive than dragonfire turned inward. The small folk took heart in the notion that the Targaryens, though fearsome, might be wise enough to avoid devouring themselves. Tales spread of Princess Baela's valor in flight, of Prince Aegon's transformation from a wayward youth to a capable leader, and of the children they raised, who seemed destined to keep House Targaryen's future bright. The bards wrote ballads praising the day the blacks and greens were bound, weaving the story into romantic fables. Years turned and the Targaryens grew older. Rhaenyra's reign was not free of strife, but the shape of that strife never escalated into a civil war that set dragon against dragon. Instead, the family faced crises from beyond, forging alliances with lords who recognized the power and stability provided by the united Targaryen house. Baela and Aegon continued as Prince and Princess of Dragonstone, guiding the island's affairs, raising their children in the old seat of Targaryen power. Their daughter Visenya grew into a formidable dragon rider, claimed by a hatchling that she named Shardscale. Their son Aegon, inquisitive and sharp, dove into studies of history and prophecy, forging an unlikely friendship with Helena over a mutual fascination with the realm's ancient mysteries. One day, in the quiet of Dragonstone's library, Baela found herself gazing at a tapestry depicting Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters Visenya and Rhaenys, uniting the Seven Kingdoms through fire and blood. She reflected on how close their own generation had come to tearing that unity apart, only to be saved by a marriage that had begun with uncertainty. She remembered the day the betrothal was announced, her anger, Aegon's indifference, and marveled at how events had unfolded. Outside, she heard the roar of dragons in the sky, the call of her children taking to the air. She thought of how her father, Daemon, had pressed a blade to Aegon's throat in that early sparring match, how Alicent had quietly tried to train Baela in the ways of courtly intrigue. Strange how these threads had woven themselves into a tapestry that now supported the realm. She felt a presence behind her. Turning, she saw Aegon standing in the doorway, wearing a half-smile. His hair had grown longer, and faint lines creased the corners of his eyes, but his Targaryen features were unmistakable. He asked her what she was thinking about. She only offered a small shrug, stepping closer to him. "About how fate can change so suddenly," she said. Aegon nodded, stepping forward to stand beside her, both of them gazing upon the tapestry of the conquest. "We could have been at each other's throats," he said, "if things had gone differently. Sometimes I still wonder how close we were to it." "Very close," Baela admitted, leaning her head against his shoulder. She felt his arm settle around her waist. Too close. They shared a moment of silence in the library, the distant sound of waves crashing against the shores of Dragonstone serving as a reminder that the sea and sky were forever in motion, that stability was only as strong as the next wave. Still, in that moment, they took comfort in the unity they had helped create, a unity that had spared countless lives and preserved House Targaryen's legacy from descending into brutal, ruinous civil war. Outside, the dragons shrieked again, triumphant and free, a symbol of House Targaryen's enduring power. And so the story went on, not as a tragic dance of the dragons, but as a more measured waltz, guided by the careful steps of those who recognized the value of forging a single house out of many branches. The whispers of the realm might still debate the nuances of law, bloodline, and prophecy, but the Targaryens themselves showed the realm that, for a time at least, the dragons' many heads could be made to cooperate. In the annals of history, maesters would one day debate whether this outcome was inevitable or a fluke, a twist in fate driven by the simple act of a reluctant marriage that ended up saving the realm from tearing itself apart. Such questions matter little to those who lived through it. They remembered the wedding feast, the hush in the throne room as the vows were spoken, and the first flight over the Blackwater when two young Targaryens tested each other's resolve. They recalled how the child of that union, Visenya Targaryen, grew into a bold dragon rider, forging a new generation that straddled both sides of the once divided house. They spoke of the legacy of King Viserys and how his final dream, Targaryens standing united, was fulfilled not in his lifetime, but through the children and grandchildren he left behind. No one in the Seven Kingdoms, not even the gods, could fully eradicate ambition or the potential for future strife. The seeds of conflict always lurked in the corridors of power. But for that era, at least, the Greens and the Blacks merged before a single sword was unsheathed in rebellion. The dragons continued to soar, and the Iron Throne remained firmly beneath the Targaryen hand, supported by the will of two young riders whose union had reshaped the course of history. In the end, their story became more than a cautionary tale. It became a testament to what House Targaryen might achieve, if only they recalled that fire's true power was not just in destruction, but in the forging of new bonds, bright and unbreakable as dragonfire itself.